everyone, welcome back to Feather Stitch House. My name's Rebecca and each week on this channel I upload videos that explore embroidery and textile art to help you get creative. Now each year we create a 52-week project called Winging It, and these are improvised projects that I make on camera to take some of the fear away from experimenting with your fabrics and thread. Now this year we are creating a fabric journal, and we're creating one piece each month, building it week by week to reflect what's happening in our lives and the world around us at this moment in time. Now for May we are creating a threshold with something wonderful beyond it. In week 1 we made a padded door. Last week we created a wall that door sits in. And this week we're going to add some signs of life on that door to suggest what our experience this side of it has been, and maybe hint at the abundance that is to come beyond it. Now this is essentially a stitch sampler. It's really easy, so all you're going to need are some threads and a needle and a pair of scissors, perhaps a heat erase pen, and if you're feeling really adventurous you might want to add in some beads or sequins, but I'm going to save that until next week. I'm going to take you through each stitch one at a time, and then you can feel free to play and create whatever signs of life you want. So gather all your bits and pieces and let's get stitching. Okay, I've brought my aperture in just so that you can get a sense of what this is starting to look like, and I am really pleased with the way this is looking so far. I really like the different textures on the brickwork, and this is some of the stitching that I put in off camera last week. So I've got some French knots, got that patchwork stitch, got a bit of needle weaving here and some French knots, a bit more weaving down here, and then there's some that have just got the stitching around the outside. And then we've got our paper pieced blocks around the door, and that it's hard to show on camera but it gives a bit more texture. Hopefully if I tip it to the side you can see that gives a little bit more texture. You could, if you wanted to, put a little bit of filling underneath your paper piece blocks. It's a bit, I suppose it's a bit late, but you can use a trapunto technique where you make a little hole in the back and fill it from the back, and that would just make them puff up that little bit more. So this week we are going to add some embroidery to the outside. So as a starting point, you could do this on your sketch if you wanted to. In fact, maybe that's a better place to do it. I find that if I'm adding to my original sketch, it helps me to do a different colour. So I'm just going to use my heat erase pen. And so this is a grassy area, and what I was thinking was we could do some of our dynamic stitch just to add some suggestion of grass growing here. So these will be just straight stitches that will give a suggestion of grass. So I'm just planning out my embroidery. You want to try not to, see how I've gone in a straight line there, you want to try and avoid doing that. So that's why a heat erase pen is so good, because you want grass growing from different places. You want them overlapping a bit like that. So we can add some stitch there. I'm going to add some beads onto the path to create sort of a sense of cobblestones, and I will do that right at the end because I don't want to deal with the weight of that. So we'll add our embellishments right at the end. Now here you could do all manner of different things. So if you wanted to, you could create some shrubbery around here. So you could do this with just some textured stitch. You could do it with lots of leaf shapes. So you could add some shrubs to the side of the door if you wanted to. You could even add some extra fabric. If you gathered up fabric, you could add some almost like fabric manipulation techniques to the front. So gathering fabric, you could use, I can't remember what the technique's called, but you basically make a Suffolk puff to make it quite a voluminous Suffolk puff, and then you put straight stitches through, and that creates a sort of rippled effect. So you could do that, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep it fairly simple. What I'm going to do is add some climbing plants. And so what I thought we could do is add some stems like that, probably using stem stitch, but you could do this in feather stitch or fly stitch if you wanted to. So fly stitch would kind of add some leaves automatically. That might look quite nice. You could then, if you wanted to, go back in with a chain stitch around each of your fly stitches like that to add some little rounded leaves. So you could do it the other way around. You could do your stem. So we do a stem stitch stem, so that would be created a bit like that. And then we could create a chain stitch like that by making our loop, putting a little line over the top, but you would extend your anchor stitch out beyond the chain, and then you can come back in and fill with a straight stitch, and they make really nice leaves. So that's a way of doing it. You could then add some French knots or some beads as little berries or flowers. We could also do feather stitch. So feather stitch would create something that looks a bit like this, and we could randomize it. So we could come off in one direction and then go back in the other direction, and then we could add in some lazy daisies. So if we did them quite small, maybe just 4 leaves. Lazy daisies are where we use chain stitch worked in a circle around a central point, and then we could add some French knots in between, and we can do this as something of a stitch sampler. So we're just going to add a little bit of life around the door to make it look a little bit less harsh. Now, if I bring my panel back in, I obviously don't want to eradicate all of these stitches. So when I'm planning my vine work, I want to kind of plan my vine so that it leaves that stitching exposed. So I want to go through, there's a bit of seed stitch on this one, hope you can see it. I want to go through my bricks in a way that leaves that stitching exposed. So you can go up through the middle of your bricks, that's fine. And here I've got some woven sections, so I want a branch to maybe come up in between those. So we're going to use our stitching from last week as a bit of a guide to where our vine is going to go. And of course you don't have to put any vine work on at all. This is totally optional. The whole point of these panels is that I give you some ideas, and sometimes I do overfill my piece because I'm trying to give you lots of ideas, and obviously to do that I've got to incorporate more things into my piece. So this is all about you learning techniques and turning them into something that is uniquely yours. So please don't feel constrained by what I'm doing. Right, so I have sorted out some shades of green as my starting point. I've also got some pearl cottons here as well, and a cotton embroidery just to have a play with. I wonder if that might be a bit too bright though. So I'm going to use these earthy greens that I've pulled out here. That's probably the brightest one I've got, but I thought we should start with something a little bit earthy because it matches the sort of tones on the front of the door. And I'm going to start with the stems, and I want to use 3 strands, so I'm just going to split this stranded cotton, and I'm going to start off over on this left hand side. So we're trying to avoid the stitching that I've already put on. Stem stitch is a fairly straightforward stitch, a bit like back stitch. When you create back stitch, on the back of your work you'll be creating something like stem stitch without realising it, but it tends to be untidy because you're not focusing on the back, you're focusing on the front. So let's go for it. So we're going to come up at the start of our line that we want to stitch, and we're going to come forward kind of a double stitch length, so that's about ½ centimetre there, and I've looped my thread over the top, and I want to rock back so that my needle comes out halfway along that distance, so halfway between where the thread comes out and where the needle first went in, and I'm going to pull through, and that's going to create a bit of a T shape. I've turned my work on the side. So that's the stitch we've just made, and our working thread is coming out towards us to form that T shape. So I want to take it back over the top, and I want to now concentrate on the distance between where the thread is coming out and where my needle's coming in, and I want to make it about the same length as that first stitch. So we're essentially ½ a stitch length beyond the end of that first stitch, and we rock our needle back to the end of that first stitch. So we're just doing exactly the same process again, but this time we've got a previous stitch to work with, and we pull our thread through, and we've got our new T shape here. So here's my new stitch, and it's springing from halfway along that first stitch. Just going to tighten that up a little bit. Okay, so thread back over the top, ½ a stitch length forward, back to the end of the previous stitch, and pull through. And what we're going to create is this sort of rope effect stitch that gives a really smooth stem and is really good for going around curves. With stem stitch you can end up pulling too tight and it will cause your work to pucker up, so just make sure you're just pulling through enough for the thread to sit flat on the surface. You don't want it bunching up, but if you pull it any tighter than that you'll end up with puckering in your work, which you don't want. You'll distort the shape of your work. If you've bonder webbed, it's a bit easier to maintain tension because there's that added stiffness to the work that really helps. I've been loving reading your comments this week, talking about your doorways and what you're trying to represent, and I love read a couple of comments and I've seen a couple on the Facebook group where you are making a step into a new stage of life with your partner, and so there's a few of you that have done double doors because there are 2 of you stepping through, and I absolutely love that idea. It makes me wish I'd done a double door now, because this is something that both Rick and I are stepping through into. I suppose he's still teaching, so he's not quite stepping through the same door as me, but certainly it's an adventure that both of us are on. Gonna struggle a little bit here with where the brickwork is fraying, so I'm just going to snip those frayed bits off. Should have planned my stem a little bit better so that it didn't lift up that green brick, but we'll get it with our leaves, it's fine. So yeah, I think it's really exciting to see the way that you're adapting this design to reflect the situation that you are in your life, and that's what winging it is all about, really. So I'm only giving ideas. That's all my part really is. I'm just giving you an idea or a way of representing something, and then you can play around to your heart's content and make it completely your own. So I'm nearly at the end of this stem now, and to finish off my line I'm just going to do my half stitch but not rock back. So I've just got that one stitch going off the end, and then I can finish off my thread on the back, and then I can come back in and add in some of my side stems. I'm going to leave that side stem at the bottom for a minute, and I'm just going to pick up the main stem from halfway up, so here, and you want to tuck your stitch right in. You can almost come out from underneath your line of stitching. I think the mistake that people make with stem stitch is forgetting that you start at the very beginning of your line. So because it's similar to back stitch in the way that we form it, sometimes I think we want to start at the end of your first stitch, and you do that and then realise that you're heading in the wrong direction. So you start at the beginning of your line and work forwards from that. Again, you can make your foliage reflect the experience that you are having in your life. So if this side of your wall is quite hostile and oppressive, then maybe you want to add some thorns, or you might want to do bare branches. If you're stepping through from a scenario that had very little life to it, or that was really difficult, you can create some plants and foliage that reflect that. And I'm wondering whether, just as I'm stitching my stems, whether I should make this a little bit autumnal. So the leaves on these trees are in the process of dying and falling off. I wonder whether that might be a nice idea, because I don't want it to be all full of life and lush, because I did have that sense of an ending with my teaching role. If you don't know what I'm talking about, by the way, I did sort of explain why we're doing a door back in week 1 of this project. So I will link that video at the top of the screen so that you can go back and watch it. It's basically representing my leaving teaching that I've been doing for 20 years on and off, and the fact that teaching started to feel like I was in the wrong place. There wasn't any life or flow there anymore. So that's what this piece is reflecting. So I don't want this to be completely dead, because there were elements of my role as a teacher that was still really enjoyable, and in many ways it was still going really well, but it just didn't feel right anymore. So I want to represent the fact that that phase of my life was coming to an end, and maybe some autumn leaves would reflect that really well. So I've got all my greens out, but actually I'm wondering whether I need to go in a slightly different direction with the leaves, and maybe I need some leaves on the floor down here that show that the leaves are falling. Maybe that would be a bit of a plan. Now you can, if you want to, when you get to the end of a stem, you could, if you wanted to, hop across and work your way back down. So I've cut off my thread, I'll start it again. But what you need to be aware of is that if you are working back the other way and you carry on putting your thread above, then the overlaps of your stems are going to curl in the opposite direction, because we're effectively working upside down. We've been working with this as the top as we've worked our way up. So if we work back down the other way, this is now the bottom. And so the way to counteract that is to, rather than looping your thread above, you loop your thread below. So you do exactly the same stitch, but loop your thread below, and you're effectively working your stitch in the same direction. And that way you won't have branches that seem to be behaving differently to everything else on your piece. So that's my first stem. I've got another couple of side branches to put on, but I thought let's experiment with some autumn leaves. Just wonder what's going to work. Is that going to work? Is that going to be too bright? Maybe that's okay. Just mooching through my box of threads looking for some more earthy tones. Maybe that's a better autumn leaf colour. And maybe this one, a bit more earthy. There we go. So I think they could work quite well. Let's start with this yellowish colour. So I'm working with 2 strands. If you're interested, by the way, that was anchor 269 that I've just been stitching with. This is anchor 874. So let me just demo some of the leaf shapes that I was talking about earlier. So the simplest one is the chain stitch leaf. So we bring our needle up at the stem like that, and we're going to loop our thread around and go back down where we came out, rock our needle forward and make sure the needle passes over that loop. So you're coming out inside the loop that you've just made and pull through. Now normally with a chain stitch we just hop over that loop and go down just on the other side, but we want to make our leaf a little bit more pointed. So I'm going to take my needle down a little distance away from that leaf, and then I'm going to come back up at the beginning of that anchor stitch inside the loop and put a stitch down the middle, make a little line like that, and that gives us a little leaf shape. Let's go down here onto this darker blue. So we're going to come up at the stem. The trick to these leaves is to make them go in lots of different directions. We don't want them all pointing up at that angle because that's going to look really weird. So let's have one pointing more vertical. All right, so we're going to bring our thread out. We're going to go back in at the point where our thread came out, rock the needle forward. So here's our loop. Going to rock our needle forward and bring it out inside that loop and pull through. Going to make an elongated anchor stitch. So we're going to take our needle back down a little distance away from the leaf. Then we come back up inside our loop and go down where we started, back at the stem, and that gives us our little leaf shape. We made that anchor stitch a little bit too long there, and you can do little clusters, so you could put a couple of leaves together. You want to sometimes overlap the stem Let's go off in a slightly different direction. You can vary the size of your leaves, you can vary how elongated that anchor stitch is, and you just want to kind of fill that space with whatever leaves you like. There we go. So let's do a bit of feather stitch. So we're going to come up at the top, we work feather stitch top to bottom, and we're going to hop across and go down horizontally across from where our thread came up and make our loop again. So here's our little loop, and we want to come up inside that loop a little distance down, so right between the two thread ends there and inside that loop, pull through. Now if we're going to do fly stitch, we would do a straight stitch now, but feather stitch we're going to make another V immediately. So we hop across horizontally and pull through to make our loop, and now we're going to come up. Try to hold that flat for you so that it doesn't get in the way. We're going to come up inside that loop a little way down and pull through, and so we've got two stitches that are hooked into each other. Now you can go back the way you came, so let's do that. So we're going to hop across to the left now, pull through to make our loop, come down a little bit and come up inside that loop, and then we're going to go back to the right. So you can rock backwards and forwards like that, but you can also make it a bit more random. So we've rocked backwards and forwards a bit. Let's do it a little bit more randomly now. Should let my thread untwist. So now we're going to go back to the right again. And let's go back to the right again. Now we can go over to the left. And over to the right, so we can keep it nice and random, make it look nicely organic like that. So I mentioned fly stitch just. I've got that same colour of thread, and I didn't say what colour it was. It's Anchor 263 if you're interested. So with fly stitch we start off in the same way, so we come up, go horizontally across, rock our needle so that it comes up in between those two stitches inside the loop catches on the working thread, pulls it into a V. So with fly stitch we're now going to do a straight stitch, and we're going to rock our needle up so that it comes out alongside the bottom of the V, like that. Then we're going to hop across, rock our needle down to the bottom of that straight stitch and make sure it comes up inside the loop. And so now we've got two V's that are attached together, and you can curve this one. So we do our straight stitch, rock our needle up, hop across and rock our needle down inside that loop and pull through. So straight stitch, rock our needle up, hop across, rock our needle down to the bottom of the straight stitch. Straight stitch, rock our needle up, and you can make these stitches get wider as you get down to the bottom if you want to, or you can keep them all the same. It's entirely up to you. And when you want to finish, you can either finish with a straight stitch or you can finish with a V and just hop over to the bottom of the V. So I'm going to put a straight stitch because I'm going to carry on with this. Depends whether you want a stem coming out of the ground or you want a leaf coming out of the ground. Just wanted to show you cretin stitch as well. So let's do slightly lighter colour of thread. So cretin stitch is not unlike feather stitch, but it's worked along a line. So I'm going to take this line here that's coming down to the bottom, and we're going to start on our line. We're going to start at the top of the line, so again it's worked top to bottom, and we want to come across to the side and bring our needle up back on that line like that, and then we're going to start halfway up that previous V, and we're going to bring our needle back up on the central line. Now you can space these really evenly, and you can make your V's even, but you can also go a bit wild. So I'm going to leave a big gap here and hook my needle diagonally to come up on that central line. And so with this one you get a stem down the centre, but you can play around with what the offshoots are doing. You're going to get a vertical line down the centre. I'm going to come up way above there, so I've come up at the same point almost as my previous V on the left, and I'm going back down in the centre over on the right. This time I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap, so come in from the left and come up on that central line, always catching the loop. Let's work a few quite close together. Again, over to the left and come out a bit further for this one. So hopefully you can see I'm getting that central line down the middle. It's very similar to feather stitch. It's kind of a variation. This makes quite a nice kind of zigzaggy stitch if you work it horizontally. But we can properly play, and you can play around with stitches. If you wanted to do something like a twisted willow, you could do a back stitch and then lace it, so weave your thread backwards and forwards through your stitches like that. There's loads of different ways that you can do it. Let's put a couple of berries on this bit of feather stitch here. So I'm going to do that with a French knot, so I can come up wherever I like really. You don't have to do it right on the ends of the leaves, you can cluster them into the V's if you want to. So I'm going to bring my thread up, hold it towards myself, stick my needle on the top, wrap a couple of times. I'll do 3, and then I'm going to rock my needle back so that it goes down not quite where the thread came out, but very close to it. And I'm going to pull on this working thread until the wraps sit on the surface of the fabric, and I'm going to keep hold of this all the time. So I want to keep tension on that thread the whole time until the last minute when it pulls out from between my fingers, and there we get a little berry. So let's do another one of those. So thread towards myself, needle on the top, I'm going to wrap a couple of times, go back almost to where the thread came out but not quite, push my needle through and tug on the working thread until the wraps sit on the fabric. Pull through, keeping hold of that working thread. Don't panic, that's not a knot, it's a noose. And pull through, and then we get our lovely little French knot. So we can do these in little clusters. Quite like the blue against this orangey coloured thread. A little cluster there, and we can come down a little bit further and add a few more. Once you get into a rhythm with French knots, they just keep on coming. And you want to vary the size of the clusters. The more wraps you do, the bigger the berry will be. So you might want to vary that. So that's just 2 wraps that I've done there. I wouldn't do more than 3 or 4 wraps because of the way that the stitch is structured. Your knot starts to do something different once you've got lots of wraps, and you won't get that little tight circular knot. Now, if you want a bigger knot than I'm making, you could also use more strands of thread. So I've got 2 strands here. If you want a bigger knot, you could do anything up to 6 strands. It's entirely up to you. Another way of getting a bigger knot is to use a colonial knot. So very similar to the French knot, but we add a little step. So thread through and towards. And this time, instead of sitting the needle on top, we're going to line up the needle with the thread. We're going to cross it over, and we're going to scoop up our thread. So thread towards us, needle parallel, over the top, and scoop. And then we do our wraps. Needle to the surface, pull on the thread, and pull through, and that gives us a chunkier knot. It's called a figure 8 knot, and you get, it's almost like a tiny little rose. So I do quite like a colonial knot. It's a good way of making a bigger knot without ending up with it really loose. We'll put some berries down that little bit of stem there, and hopefully that's given you a little bit of an idea. So let me just show you another couple of leaves that you can do. So let's work on this stem here and do a detached fly stitch. So I want to come up, it's exactly the same as fly stitches we've done. We're going to hop across, and we're going to take our needle back up at the stem like that, hop over the V, and go back down the other side. And if you want to, you can add in a little straight stitch in the middle. You can do this in the same colour or a different colour, it's entirely up to you. So we've got a little kind of almost like a fir tree pine needle cluster like that. These are just really super simple leaves, that you can achieve with a quite narrow repertoire of stitches. So hop over the end of the V, and just like we did before with our chain stitch, we're going to pop up at the top and add in another stitch like that. So you get these little three-pronged leaves as well, and you can also work several fly stitches into each other. So you can start with a straight stitch, and then we're going to come up just to the side of that initial stitch, hop across, come back down at the bottom of the stitch like that, hop across and come up just below and to the side of the previous stitch, hop across and come up in the middle, hop over and up to the side, hop across, come up at the bottom, and then you can put a stalk on it if you want to, and you've got a little leaf like that. So that's another one. And then a granito, I really love these. We're going to bring our thread up and we're going to make a tiny little straight stitch like that, and then we're going to slide our needle so that it comes up at the same point that we started at and pull through. And now we're going to loop our thread to the left and take it back down at the bottom and come up again at our starting point. And we want to make our thread sit to the left of that first stitch. Now we're going to come loop to the right, go down at the bottom, come back up at the top, and we're going to ease our thread around to the right of our stitch. We've just got a little loose strand there. We're just going to pull that till it goes through. So we're going to go back round to the left and ease your stitch to the left, and then come up again at your starting point, loop round to the right and ease your thread round to the right of your stitch, and you get these little almost like seeds that make lovely leaves as well. So that's called a granito, literally means a grain or a seed. You just have to make sure you don't pull too tight with those because you can get lots of puckering. But that's another way that you can make a little bit of foliage. So I'm going to have a play around with my leaves at the side, and then I'll come back and show you where we're up to. Okay, this is where we're up to at the end of today's session. I thought about setting up our meadow, but I don't think we need to do that this week. We can sort that next week. And so here's our threshold. This is where we're up to now. So I've still got to put some beads on to line the edge of my path, but I've added some foliage around my door to give a sense that this is a garden, and for me it was a place of life but also a place that was ending. So I've done some autumnal leaves on here. I didn't want to put any on the ground. I didn't think it was necessary. Just realised I've left my little feathery leaves on here, which I will take those off. I use that technique on my little blue flowers down here, and I've put in some little tiny pink pistol stitches. There we go. So I've got some pistol stitches there. You can see some of my stitching on my bricks a bit closer up, my autumn leaves, and you can see what I've done on the grass there. I've used a pearl cotton and just done some random straight stitches, the occasional fly stitch. There's a fly stitch there, there's a fly stitch there, just to add a little bit of definition. And then over here I did some granitos for leaves. This is my Crete and Stitch plant there. I've got my feather stitch vine with all those little French knots that I really like. So that's where we're up to. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how you're going to decorate your wall and what plants you're going to put on. I have left it there because I don't want to lose that sense of the brickwork. I don't want to lose all that work that we did last week. I want it to still show through. So I'm quite happy to leave it at that point. And like I say, next week we're going to put in a meadow. And we've just got that smallish space, but I think it's going to take a bit of time to fill all that space. So I really hope you've enjoyed that, some time for some mindful stitching. Really looking forward to seeing how you decorate your doors, and do share your work at hashtag FSHWingingIt24. Don't forget to tag me in, because that way I'm more likely to see it. And if you don't want to share on Instagram, you can join our private Facebook group, which is, all the details are in the description below. Thanks so much for watching, and if you have enjoyed this and you want to do another botanical piece, I will link a video over here so that you can carry on stitching once you finish your door. And down here I'll put a playlist of videos that will keep you busy for as much time as you would like to be sewing. So have a great week, and I will see you very soon. Bye.